Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Collins, for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing and to share my thoughts on the role that federal policies play in affecting the amount of corn ethanol that we produce and the impact these policies have on crop and food prices. Many people are confused about the impact of federal ethanol policies. Much of this confusion is caused by people assuming that because government support was instrumental in bringing forth the ethanol industry, that a withdrawal of that support would get us back to a time when prices of corn, soybeans, and wheat were less than half of today's levels. The additional demand for corn from the ethanol industry has been a major factor in causing the price of corn to more than double in the last 18 months, from $2.50 a bushel to more than $6 per bushel. This link between ethanol and corn prices gives us insight into the following question. What would happen to the price of corn if we were to eliminate the U.S. ethanol industry? But this link does not give us any insight into what would happen to the price of corn, food, and gasoline if current federal biofuels policies were relaxed or eliminated. They're two different questions. We need to recognize that U.S. ethanol plants will not simply disappear with a change in U.S. ethanol policy. Plants will keep operating as long as it makes economic sense for them to do so. So the three federal policies that I want to consider in this testimony are the renewable fuel standard, the blenders tax credit, and the tariff on imported ethanol. The RFS specifies minimum biofuels consumption levels for the U.S. Mandated use rises from 9 billion gallons in 2008 to 10.5 billion gallons in 2009. These mandates can be met from either domestically produced or imported biofuels. The 51-cent per gallon blenders tax credit is a direct subsidy given to gasoline blenders. The credit increases the willingness of blenders to buy ethanol. This increased demand increases the price of ethanol, ethanol profits and production, the demand for corn, and the price of corn. The tax credit has greatly stimulated the growth of the industry. The import tariff is a tax on imported ethanol. It has prevented the U.S. from importing large quantities of Brazilian ethanol, except for a short time during 2006 when the phase-out of MTBE caused U.S. ethanol prices to skyrocket. So given the level of concern about current crop prices, I first want to examine the short-term impacts of a policy change. By short-term, I mean the following. What impact would a change in federal policy have on the supply of ethanol and the market price of corn during the period September 1 of this year to August 31st of next year? This period corresponds to the marketing year for corn and soybeans, so it's a logical time period to look at. A focus on corn is warranted because it is the crop most directly affected by U.S. biofuels policies, and it is the crop that most determines the impacts on the cost of food because of its importance in determining the cost of feeding livestock. My graduate student and I have considered a number of different policy scenarios, but I want to focus on three today. These are, what would happen if we waive the mandates but keep the tax credit and the import tariffs? Or we could keep the mandates but eliminate the import tariff and the tax credits, or we could eliminate all three. So I want to look at these in turn. Because both the blender's tax credit and the mandate increase the demand for ethanol, elimination of only one of them would have little impact because the other one would effectively keep the industry operating at close to capacity. Elimination of the mandate would reduce expected ethanol production by only about 4%. Ethanol price would drop by less than 2%. Ethanol imports would fall by 18%, and the price of corn wouldn't change. Maintenance of the tax credit would keep demand for ethanol high, and the import tariff would keep imports down. Thus, recent calls for an easing of the RFS would do almost nothing to reduce food prices or ease the financial pain of the livestock industry, at least in the short run. The impact of eliminating both the blender's tax credit and the import tariff, but keeping the mandate, would be somewhat larger because increased imports would reduce the amount of domestic ethanol that would be needed to meet the mandate. Domestic ethanol production would decline by about 11%, and the price of corn would drop about 7%, so it's something. The impacts of this policy change are not any larger because the RFS keeps total demand high, and the supply of imported ethanol simply is not unlimited. A rollback of all ethanol incentives and protection would have the largest impacts. Domestic ethanol production would drop by 21%. The loss of demand subsidies would cause the price of ethanol to drop by 18%, and the price of corn would drop by 13%. So that's the biggest estimate impact I could find. We estimate that the drop in ethanol supply would increase gasoline pump prices by about 4 cents per gallon. That is, the expanded ethanol actually is keeping gas prices down a little bit. The livestock industry has been hard hit by the run-up in feed costs, but high gasoline prices combined with existing ethanol plants means that corn prices in the near term will remain well above historical levels, even if the RFS, the blender's tax credit, and the import tariff are all eliminated. This is not to say, however, that a 13% drop in corn prices would not help livestock producers and to a lesser extent reduce food prices. A 13% drop in corn prices would reduce the cost of feeding beef cattle by about 5% of revenue, hogs by about 7% of revenue, eggs by 4%, dairy cattle by 3%. This drop in production costs would eventually translate into consumer prices that would be a bit lower than they otherwise would be. The longer-term impact of a change in federal biofuels policy depends crucially on what the price of crude oil is going to be. If we were to eliminate all federal biofuels policies today and future crude oil prices support wholesale gasoline prices of about $3 a gallon, then we're looking at about $4 corn, and actually the ethanol industry would expand just from profit incentive. A return of wholesale gasoline prices to $2, we should be so lucky, would keep ethanol production at about where we are today, maybe a little higher, and corn prices would fall substantially to $3.60 a bushel. In contrast, if we move to $4 gasoline, corn prices won't fall below $5, and the ethanol industry will expand to take advantage of the market opportunities. The long-term results reveal two general findings. First, corn prices and gasoline prices are now inextricably linked through existing ethanol plants and the knowledge of how to efficiently convert corn to transportation fuel. This link will not be broken unless corn ethanol production is somehow capped. A return to inexpensive feed is simply not going to occur unless crude oil prices dramatically fall and biofuels policy has substantially changed. Second, in the long run, if gasoline prices rise even higher and signal that we need alternative fuel, the corn ethanol industry will expand even beyond what we project today. I'd like to now turn to the impact of policy on the prices of other crops and food. Expansion of corn use implies a cutback in planted acreage and higher prices for other crops. Soybeans is the crop most affected by competition for land. Wheat is affected by a much smaller amount. U.S. rice acreage is largely unaffected by corn prices because corn and rice are grown in different regions, and it takes a fairly large incentive to move rice producers away from rice. The direct link that many people have made between U.S. biofuel subsidies and world rice prices is difficult to find. With regards to food prices, we must remember that to a large extent, Americans do not eat agricultural commodities. Rather, we eat food manufactured from these commodities. My colleagues and I estimated that a 30% change in the price of corn, along with corresponding changes in the prices of other crops, would change home food expenditures by about 1.3%. As I've discussed, altering U.S. biofuels policies will change the price of corn by much less than 30%, which suggests that federal biofuels policies, changing them, will not dramatically affect the price that Americans will pay for food. In the longer run, the price of corn and food will be determined largely by the price of crude oil. Because the U.S. is a major exporter of corn, soybeans, wheat, and rice, a change in biofuels policies that does affect U.S. prices will also affect international prices. Again, corn and soybean prices are the ones most affected by a change in federal policy. Wheat prices would be affected less. Rice prices would be largely unaffected. Some may be skeptical of my small estimates of the effects of a change in federal biofuels policies because of the huge run-up in wheat, rice, and feed costs over the last 18 months. But again, I have not tried to determine the impact of the ethanol industry on commodity prices. That impact is large. Rather, I am asking what would be the impact on these commodity prices from a change in federal biofuels policies, given that we are well on our way to having 11 billion gallons of ethanol capacity in this country, and that markets expect high gasoline prices for the foreseeable future. The combination of in-place capacity and high-priced gasoline implies modest impacts of a change in policy. In conclusion, there's no doubt that the growth of the ethanol industry is an important factor in the run-up in corn and soybean prices. But this does not imply that a change in federal biofuels policy would reverse this make these prices go substantially lower. If we continue to see crude oil prices in excess of $100 per barrel, then there's little that Congress or EPA can do in the short run to significantly reduce the price of corn, short of an outright ban on producing ethanol from corn. Thank you.